You saw it, didn't you? As she muttered this to me, I awkwardly but honestly nodded. After all, there's nothing to be done about what I'd accidentally seen, the image of her that was spinning in my mind, refusing to leave. Yeah, what I had unintentionally seen while I was heavily drunk was. My name is Steve Patterson. I'm just a typical office worker. I was leading a moderately enjoyable life until today when things became a little out of the ordinary. I'm on a company trip. We're staying at this old but charming inn, complete with a hot spring and clean rooms. It's pretty awesome. Our company isn't that big, only about 20 people, but this year we'd performed particularly well, so they decided to give us nice accommodations. 2 male staff share a room, and female staff got a single room. There aren't many female staff, and it's probably a special treat for our top performer, Catherine. Catherine is a stunning top saleswoman. Despite being my coworker, she is nothing like me. She is excellent and kind, like a goddess. As you might imagine, she was surrounded by the boss and department manager during the banquet at our trip. The boss and manager were clearly smitten with the hostess. Amidst all this, my gaze was directed at Catherine. Catherine, we have high hopes for you this year. You're our company's ace. Thank you. While watching her smile from afar, I sipped my drink. Even if it's pathetic, the thought of an average Joe like me drinking with Catherine felt audacious. As I was drinking like this, I ended up drinking more than I thought. The bosses were having a great time with the hostesses, and their boorish laughter echoed throughout the banquet hall. The female staff had returned to their rooms early because it was getting late, so it seemed like the bosses were having their fun time. Feeling dizzy from drinking too much, I made my exit in a hurry. My room was, although this was a traditional inn, unusually like a hotel, it had names and numbers on each room. Apparently, they used to have just names, but they started adding numbers to make it easier as they had more guests. Thanks to such efforts, this bed and breakfast has a long history as an established business. I looked at my room number. 30. There it is. The inn didn't have an auto lock, so I didn't need to bother unlocking the door. Also, as I had a habit of carrying all my valuables with me, I didn't lock my door since I didn't leave anything valuable in the room. I opened the door with a creak, took off my shoes, and opened the sliding door. But, for some reason, Catherine was in the room. The moment I saw it, my drunkenness instantly sobered, and I closed the door. Whoa, sorry, wrong room, oops. Even though I had sobered up, I was still staggering, and I stumbled on the threshold of the entrance and fell spectacularly. Wait, are you okay? Catherine tried to ask in a flustered manner, but she couldn't say anything. The scene was spinning in my head. She had a glamorous and fit body. Her skin was translucent white. I saw things in my head that I shouldn't have seen, yet they kept appearing over and over again. But then, I remembered the big bruise on her side. That bruise, I felt like I'd seen it somewhere. Even as I thought about this, perhaps because I was too drunk, I fell asleep right there at the entrance. A few hours later, I was prostrating myself before Catherine. It was to be expected. If Catherine made a complaint, there was no chance I would win. My life was to be decided by Catherine's forgiveness. Although Catherine looked displeased, she said, "You were really drunk, so I'll forgive you this time, but don't drink that much anymore." I'm sorry. Actually, it was quite embarrassing, but Catherine had put me to bed in her room after I fell asleep on the spot. I have shown her a pathetic sight, and my pride was completely crushed. No matter how kind a goddess she is, it's only natural that she would be disgusted by my series of actions. Just as I had prepared myself for this, she finally opened her mouth. Aren't you going to say anything? Her usual confident smile was nowhere to be found. She seemed a bit down, lacking confidence. From my perspective as a man, I had been shown a captivating scene, and I was actually thankful for it. As I was considering my words carefully to avoid causing a big problem, she murmured, "You saw the bruise, didn't you?" I saw it, but what about it? Doesn't it disappoint you? Everyone says so. If only it weren't for that bruise, I'd be perfect. I did see the bruise, but the impact of the other pots was too strong, and I didn't think that bruise was something I needed to worry about. I don't think there's such a thing as a perfect person. It's kind of like your trademark, and it's cool. I inadvertently blurted out those words. Then, she widened her eyes in surprise. At the same time, I felt a sense of déjà vu. Had I said this line somewhere before? "You're really different, Steve. You're the second person to say that to me." "Oh, was it your boyfriend? Isn't it well known in the office that I'm single? Are you being sarcastic? I was told that by a classmate in elementary school. Well, I've transferred to another school due to my parents' circumstances, so I haven't seen him in a while." Upon hearing her say this, I exclaimed, "Ah, it's a distant memory, but there was a girl with a bruise in my class. I think it was around the second grade. During gym class, while changing, one of the boys said to her, 'What's that black spot? So gross.' A few boys joined in the mockery, and she ended up crying. I remember saying the same thing to her. She ended up moving away, and I can't even remember her name anymore. Could it be Catherine?" Wasn't your elementary school before you moved? Maplewood Elementary." Yes, but how do you know that, Steve?" "Yeah, I just remembered that there was a girl in my class who had a birthmark like yours. You moved away before we went to the 4th grade, right?" "Yes, that's right." "Wait, Steve, were you the boy from back then?" It turns out, Catherine and I had attended the same elementary school. Catherine's parents divorced at the time, and she moved with her mother, changing her last name to her current one. I never thought I'd reunite with her as a coworker at the same company. But you remembered me after seeing me undressed. That's kind of awkward. I'm sorry about that." "It's fine, but we should probably head back to our rooms. It's late." I was feeling better, so I apologized to Catherine once more before heading back to my room. A month later, Catherine and I had gone close enough to have tea together occasionally. That's because Catherine had become a little comfortable with me, as I didn't get disappointed seeing her birthmark. We'd have tea, and sometimes even a drink or two. When we did, it was almost always time for Catherine's ranting session. "Why does nobody value you?" "Because I'm just not that good." "What are you talking about? You quietly handle administrative tasks and help others without anyone noticing. You need to assert yourself more." Catherine's complaints were mostly about my job evaluation. "I'm simply doing what I think will make everyone's job easier, nothing more." Catherine insists that it's incredible, but I think it's an overstatement. When I say so, Catherine always pouts. Seeing her like that was kind of cute, and I thought our relationship would continue like this forever. But then an incident occurred that marked the end of this relationship. Catherine said she was going to meet a client, and then all contact with her was cut off. Our company deals with dyeing, and Catherine was supposed to be visiting a factory in the countryside today, but she hasn't returned to the office for hours. No one can get in touch with Catherine, and the factory says she came for a visit and then left. Even when the work hours ended, Catherine hadn't come back, and her mother, who is her emergency contact, also didn't know where she was. I was supposed to be done for the day, but it was hard to believe that the Catherine would go somewhere without reporting to the office. I decided to go looking for Catherine after work. The road leading to the factory is rarely used by vehicles. It was dark at night, and there was little I could do on my own other than look down at the mountain from the road, but maybe there was some kind of clue. As I was driving, I found Catherine's car stopped on the side of the road. But Catherine was nowhere to be found. The driver's seat door was open and the keys were still in the ignition. "Catherine, where are you?" It was when I shouted. "Steve, is that you?" A frail voice could be heard from the other side of the guardrail, meaning it was from the woods. Beyond the guardrail, there wasn't a paved slope, and at the bottom of it was where I found Catherine. Her clothes were tattered as if she had fallen down. She was weakly raising her hand in distress. I immediately contacted the paramedics, and Catherine was rescued. During her fall, she twisted her ankle and had some minor scrapes, but thankfully, her life was not in danger. She mentioned that her car had broken down on her way back from the client's place. While checking out the issue, she lost her balance due to her high heels and fell through a gap in the guardrail. Catherine wondered, "Why were you there, Steve?" "I'm glad you were, but it's strange." So, I told her, I thought something might have happened. I was looking for you because I knew you weren't the type to skip work without telling anyone. Hearing this, she blushed and smiled. "How about going to the aquarium next time, as a thank you?" This was clearly an invitation for a date. It was different from the usual casual suggestion for drinks. This had me puzzled, but I declined her offer. "Let's go when you're fully recovered. You've twisted your ankle after all. We should start with somewhere closer. I'd like to be the one to ask you out to the aquarium." Upon hearing this, Catherine seemed pleased. There was a reason why I declined. I had planned to ask her out to the aquarium myself and confess my feelings to her. A man should make the first move. Well, that's just my pride talking. But, in the end, I wasn't able to ask her to go to the aquarium. The reason being, a week after Catherine's accident, we were informed that our company was to be merged. It was so sudden and surprising. But given the shaky performance of the company, I could understand if the boss was doing this to protect our livelihoods. We had good performance this year, but we had been struggling for the past few years. The grand company trip we had, that was the last of it. That's why it was so luxurious. So, it was inevitable for the company to merge. But the problem was with the company we were merging with. It was a major fashion company, and we were to be assigned to its newly established dyeing department. And the boss of that company was Catherine's mother. After her divorce, she had started a small company and had built it up to its current size. When I went missing, the boss contacted my mom, right? When he called her again saying I was found, she started looking into the company. Catherine's mother had always let her live her life the way she wanted, never interfering in her work, but she had gotten worried that the company environment might not be good, given her daughter's predicament. Upon investigating, she fell in love with our dyeing work. The boss talks swiftly concluded given the dismal business performance of our company. The paperwork is still in process, but it seems to be ongoing. A company transfer. I was thinking about this nonchalantly when suddenly the boss tapped me on the shoulder. "Steve, can I talk to you for a moment?" The boss was looking at me seriously. Could it be that he's going to say, "I'm sorry, but you're fired"? The pressure from the boss was intense. Yes. The truth is, you're the only one being transferred to a different department." "What? Am I not in the dyeing department?" I was surprised as I received an explanation from the boss. Apparently, based on the recommendation from a woman named Catherine, I was the only one assigned to the main office. I was shocked by this, but Catherine too was going to be assigned to the office. When I told my mom about your hard work, she said she wanted you in the office. She's a tough person even with her own family, so it wasn't just because I recommended you. It's based on your achievements," Catherine said. I was perplexed by what Catherine said, but I wanted to make the most of this opportunity that I had been given. Besides, I didn't want to disgrace Catherine, who had recommended me. I'll do my best. And thus, I progressed in my new company, which was about 20 years ago now. I'm in my 50s now. But thanks to my hard work back then, I'm now an assistant to the CEO. The company has grown significantly under a new CEO, but the new boss keeps me busy. At work and even at home. Steve, where's the wine? Come on, Catherine, you're drinking too much. I scold my wife, Catherine, who has finished a whole bottle of wine at home. Since joining the office, we work together more, and although I originally intended to confess my feelings at the aquarium, Catherine confessed to me first. And so, we started dating, and then got married. We've been blessed with children, and we're leading a successful life together. Catherine took over the company, and I'm supporting her, but no matter how many years pass, Catherine keeps leading me. I find it absolutely endearing. Why not? It's our home, so it's okay to get drunk. You'll catch a cold if you sleep on the floor again. I don't need to hear that from you. I was at a loss for words. We've been together for 20 years, but she never fails to make fun of me. But I'm not upset. After all, if it weren't for that incident, I wouldn't have been able to spend time with her like this. All right, if you get too drunk, I'm sleeping on the couch. I don't want to sleep alone, so I'll stop drinking. Catherine says, smiling. I want to stay together until our smiles become all wrinkled. Thinking so, we enjoy our evening drinks in moderation, as always. Normally, I wouldn't be working in a place like this. Every day, all I had were complaints. One day, I opened the door to my apartment to find an unfamiliar woman changing her clothes. I thought I was hallucinating due to stress and dissatisfaction. Sorry, I can see you there. To my words, she calmly. My name is Tommy Reynolds. I work for a sports equipment manufacturer. On my 29th birthday this year, I reached the top of the sales department. I was featured in an interview in the company newsletter, published monthly, as the top salesperson. Among my colleagues, I was considered the most successful. I take pride in myself and have always approached my job with pride. I think it's the result of hard work, not talent. But in this world, the nail that sticks out gets hammered down. I wish I could have warned my past self, who thought he would be fine. The person who undermined me was my direct superior. I had been mistreated by this boss for a long time. The meeting times were wrong. He intentionally didn't pass on messages from clients, and there were too many incidents to count on both hands. I had managed to pull through so far, but this time it became irreversible. That client had promised me a large contract. On the day of the contract, my boss schemed to steal my deal. He gave me the wrong time. As a result, I was late on the contract date, and my boss, who was asked to explain the details to the client's representative again, couldn't answer anything. The client became suspicious, and we lost the big contract. My boss pinned all the blame on me. He reported to the top that it was because I was late. My boss, who is a relative of the company's president, got his way, and all my claims were rejected. My colleagues all looked at me with sympathetic eyes. The verdict for me was a demotion. I received orders to be dispatched to a factory in the countryside near the ocean, a rural town in California. I was off the fast track, and I left the headquarters while my boss saw me off through with a sneering smile. The factory I was dispatched to was a sewing factory near the sea. I was given the position of office manager. The factory had a factory manager, and there was no such position as office manager in the first place. It was a made-up position for me, a sinecure. I guess the rumor about me had reached the factory. Everyone was wondering why the top salesman who graced the company newsletter was assigned to their factory. The factory manager is a gentle, kind person who is loved by everyone and is about to retire soon. He never asked me in depth about this personnel change. And so my new life began. I was told that the company housing was fully occupied, and I rented an apartment near the factory. It's so run down and almost laughable. Surprisingly though, it's clean, and that was the only saving grace. I don't have the same passion for my job anymore, of course. My work is nothing more than checking the time cards of the employees working in the factory at a small office. Every day, it's the same routine with nothing exciting going on. I never thought I'd see the day, but now I go home on time every day. I enjoy a slow walk back to my apartment while gazing at the sea shimmering in the sunset. This walk back home has become my only joy. One day, I heard some noise from my apartment when I returned. Of course, I locked it before leaving, and I had the key. The word burglar flashed through my mind. I slowly turned the doorknob. It wasn't locked. Pulling the doorknob towards me, the door swung wide open. What lay before my eyes was a strange woman changing clothes. A half-naked woman was staring at me with a bewildered expression. "Ha, sorry, I can see you." That's the first thing that slipped out of my mouth. Oh, how embarrassing. The woman in mid-change continued to change without hesitation. Regaining my senses, I rushed out of the apartment and slammed the door shut. As the door shut with a loud thud, I could hear the woman's hearty laughter from inside. I double-checked the room number multiple times. This was definitely my apartment. I didn't recognize the woman who was laughing inside. Summer is near, and I braced myself if she might be somewhat unusual. "I kept you waiting. Please, come in." A carefree voice from inside the apartment called out to me, who was crouching down with my head in my hands. No, this is my apartment, I thought, but nervously opened the door. She had a healthy tan skin and big expressive eyes, unlike anyone I've seen around here. "Who are you?" I was dumbfounded as she tilted her head and asked. This apartment, it's mine." From her expression, it didn't seem like she had the slightest idea that she might be in the wrong place. I showed her the key I had and explained that this was my apartment. Then she showed me her key, with a dolphin keychain attached. She said this was her friend's apartment, and she had a spare key. Indeed, when we tried it, her key opened the door without a problem. "I'll call my friend and check," she said, and called her friend on her smartphone. After about 3 minutes of talking, she hung up the phone and bowed deeply. "I'm so sorry. It seems like she moved out, and the landlord hasn't changed the locks yet. I apologize for the trouble. Apparently, her friend used to live in this apartment and has since moved out." Unaware of this fact, she had entered the apartment using the spare key as usual. The landlord not changing the lock seems to be the root cause. "No, really," I said. Then I replied to her desperate bow with a bow of my own. After all, I had accidentally gotten a full view of a young woman changing. "Well, let's call it even then." She raised her head with a cheery grin. Her name was Jennifer Watson. She'd come to this town, which felt a lot like San Diego, to help out at a friend's dive shop during the busy season. She'd stayed in this room every year, not realizing her friend had moved. "So, Jennifer, are you a diving instructor?" Not quite feeling right to simply shoo her out, I offered her some iced tea I'd made in advance. "Thank you," she said, draining the glass with apparent enjoyment. I do instruct, but I mostly do free diving. It's a pricey sport, you know. She laughed as I, clueless about the difference between diving and free diving, looked puzzled. Jennifer was a free diving athlete. More specifically, a constant weight freediver. A sport where you dive deep into the ocean without an oxygen tank. I worked for a sport goods manufacturer, but I didn't know much about such a niche sport. I bet there aren't many competitors in the sport, huh? There aren't as many in the US. It's on the rise, but it originated in Europe. Jennifer educated me about this world I knew nothing of. Past a certain depth, you lose buoyancy and just sink. Being sucked into the pitch-black ocean floor is a feeling beyond description, she said with a chuckle. The mere thought of sinking to the ocean floor gave me the chills. When I told her that, she burst out laughing. Why not start with snorkeling? Since you live in this coastal town, you should make the most of the sea. Before I could respond, I heard a car honk from outside the window. Her friend seemed to have arrived to pick her up. Oh, looks like my ride's here. See you around. I'll come by to invite you for diving, she said before making a swift exit. I felt like I'd been struck by lightning, staring blankly at the closed front door for a while. It was the first time I'd felt excited since moving to this town. Her sudden appearance had brought fresh air into my stale life. A few days later, she popped into the factory where I worked. She'd brought lunch to her friend for lunchtime at the factory. I couldn't afford to make you a lunchbox. Yet as she said this, she tossed an absurdly large sandwich to me. Watch out for the lunch bomb. The contents of the sandwich she'd brought was thick ham and scrambled egg. Made it a meal of itself. Apparently, she knew the factory manager too. As I savored the sandwich given to me by Jennifer, the factory manager brought over some iced tea. You seem to know Jennifer well. Well, there's a bit of history there, I replied, prevaricating, unable to admit that I had seen her changing clothes. Taking a sip of his iced tea, the factory manager announced he had something to discuss. A first since he took the position. I was immediately tense, worried about some issue at the factory. But his talk had nothing to do with the factory at all. He asked if I knew Jennifer was a free diving athlete, who I had peeked at her changing for. I nodded in agreement. Great, that speeds things up. He gave a firm nod of his hand. He asked if I, ex-top salesperson, could approach her to offer sponsor. When it came to international competitions, the costs add up quickly. Apparently, she had had to give up on competitions because she couldn't afford them before. He wanted to support her, but being out of touch with the headquarters, he was unable to help. He thought that if anyone could get headquarters moving, it would be me, who used to be a top salesperson. I was unable to respond to this unexpected request. I knew nothing about free diving, nor who Jennifer really was. I told the factory manager my thoughts honestly. Well then, let's start with diving, he suggested, pointing at the calendar with a grin. It seemed my days off would be spent by the sea for a while. The factory manager was always quick to act. A characteristic I attribute to competent people. On my next day off following our conversation, I was promptly enrolled in a diving school, with theoretical lessons in the morning followed by practical ones in the afternoon. Raised in the city, the deep sea was an unknown world to me. Jennifer was there to gently support me as I cautiously approached it. The first time I dived into the sea, it was, to put it mildly, awesome. While there was a lot to learn, and it wasn't all fun and games. Yet, looking up at the sea surface from beneath, glistening with sunlight, and being enveloped by the gentle seawater was indescribable. The bubbles I exhaled climbing to the sea surface seemed like a scene from a fairy tale. I was captivated by the sea in just one day. You'll get addicted, Jennifer had told me just before diving. Turned out she was spot on. After finishing the practical diving session and the school finished for the day, I accompanied Jennifer for her free diving practice. She hung a guide rope, relaxing and floating on the surface of the water. A countdown began 2 minutes in advance, and she was to begin her dive within 10 seconds of the official top announcement. Overstepping that would result in a penalty. After a series of deep breaths to fill her lungs with air, she disappeared beneath the water. All that was left for us in the venue was to watch the clock and wait for Hart to resurface. The tension during this time was beyond imagination. There's a clip attached at the depth, one declares. You must remove it and safely resurface. Apparently, some athletes faint from lack of air. The fear was magnified after doing a dive, falling into the depths of the sea due to gravity without an oxygen cylinder on your back. A few minutes can feel incredibly long. Eventually, she emerged on the sea surface. As per the procedure, she said, "I'm okay." Just like that. She removed her nose clip and smiled. I'm well versed in land sports, but it was the first time I saw free diving up close. I thought the way the team came together in tension to support her was impressive. The concept of doing it for someone else came to mind. I might be able to do it. It was a moment when the switch in my head turned on after a long time. From that day, I went to the sea on my holidays. Of course, I got a license. I accompanied her many times in her practice and built up an image in my mind. I also became friends with the people at the diving shop and guest house. They are all cheerful and love the sea. No one speaks ill of Jennifer. It seemed they were purely cheering for her dream. The expectations weighing on me are also huge. To make her dream come true, my hard work is essential. It was a long time since I was transferred that I visited the headquarters. There is no marine sports department in my company. I decided to take on the challenge of making presentation to establish a new department. The headquarters were as lively as before after a long time. I pulled myself together and attended the internal presentation. The trigger for taking the step was a single phrase from her. There's no marine sports department. Then you should create one. If there's no place, create it yourself. Make the most of your unique strengths and do something that no one else can think of. There are faces of colleagues and bosses who have trapped me at the presentation. I can't fail. A long-lost fighting spirit lit up within me. The presentation was a great success. The president is very interested in launching a new department. He was also interested in nurturing young athletes. In a few days, the CEO and several headquarters staff members will come to watch a mock freediving competition. We've reached the tipping point. The presentation was a success. The bosses are coming to watch the mock competition, not just for Jennifer. Can't other athletes participate as well? I contacted her right away. On the other end of the phone, everyone was celebrating the success of my presentation. Understood. I'll gather the people, you decide the day. I really appreciate all of your help. I heard her voice sound a little tearful. I'm the one who should be saying thank you. Without her support, I don't think I could have recovered. At the CEO's request, the arrangement for the mock competition was made quickly. On the day of the event, it was sunny, and the sea surface was reflecting the sunlight brilliantly. We hired a chartered bus, and the bosses arrived. They planned to visit the factory in the morning and watch the free diving mock competition in the afternoon. It seemed to be the first time the CEO visited the factory, and the factory managers were busy with the hospitality. Surprisingly, the factory manager and the CEO seemed to be old friends. Listening to their conversation filled with old stories, it seemed the factory manager was the top salesperson among their peers. The factory manager also seemed to have quite a past. At a barbecue on the beach, the athletes and local divers mingled. I arranged direct conversations with the CEO about diving, the competition, and the predicaments the athletes face. In the open atmosphere, the lunch meeting proceeded smoothly. That's when a man made a snide remark in a noticeably loud voice. He was picking on a young girl even though he wasn't drunk. He was openly ridiculing the free diving competition as just diving. When I checked the source of the voice, it was my former boss who had undermined me. I wasn't expecting him to be accompanying this tour, so my mood sunk a bit. In front of the athletes, my former boss kept provoking by saying that this mundane sport wouldn't work for promotion. Although there were athletes who got angry, Jennifer stepped in and stopped them. It's pretty lame to pretend to know something you don't and then make fun of it, she said, looking straight into my ex-boss's face. Unable to find a retort, he glared at her, his face turning bright red. Even when glared at, she remained calm. She had confidence and conviction. As we started spending more time together, I found myself drawn to her just like I was drawn to the sea. I haven't told her yet, but if this presentation is successful, I intend to confess my feelings to her. The mock competition in the afternoon was a huge success. Since it was done while explaining the rules of the competition one by one, it was easy to understand even for those watching free diving for the first time. She patiently answered every question thrown by the CEO and other employees. The CEO and the others seemed to have felt the same excitement and tension I felt when I first watched free diving. They were also fascinated by the charm of the staff involved in this competition. The presentation, including the mock competition, was a huge success. On the spot, the CEO made a contract with their team. He promised to provide full backup. He even expressed a desire to obtain a diving license at a diving school next weekend. So, another man fascinated by the sea was born. I'm going back to the head office to establish a marine sports division. The former boss, who had a condescending attitude towards them, was demoted by the CEO. It seems he caused various troubles while I was not at the headquarters. Honestly, I'm relieved that I no longer have the opportunity to work with him, because I don't want him to interfere with this project. And several months have passed since I returned to the headquarters. A poster featuring her is prominently displayed in the headquarters lobby. Upon hearing that she is not just a model but an active player, my colleagues seemed unable to hide their surprise. The relationship between me and her seems to have taken a step forward and a step back. Of course, I told her my feeling like a man. She laughed and said, "I'm okay." But now, she is diving the seas around the world. There are few tournaments in Japan. The main battlefield is the seas around the world. It's a dangerous competition, so I get nervous on tournament days. I'm anxious about her safety. But she's different. She's enjoying the seas around the world. I started to feel like it's impossible to tie her down with words like marriage. "When will you return to the US next time, Jennifer?" I can hear the sound of the waves behind Jennifer. She must have just gotten out of the sea. "I'll be back in the US next week." Her voice is a bit patchy, maybe because the signal is weak. No matter how far away she is, she contacts me. My return this time is special. Jennifer says in a somewhat desperate tone. I'm getting nervous at the seriousness of Jennifer's voice. I don't think it's a breakup, but... Jennifer, what happened? I timidly ask Jennifer, who is sighing on the other end of the phone. Why are you sighing? What's wrong? Is there anything I can do? I repeat my words, anxious. I was pretending to be okay even when we're apart, but actually, I'm not. Then you have to take responsibility. After a brief silence, I heard a sulky voice. Why are you making me wait like this? You better step up and propose properly. With that, the call abruptly ended. I stood there, dumbfounded, clutching my smartphone. Snapping back to reality, I left work early and rushed to the jewelry store. I was hustling and bustling about, preparing for the proposal. Then, the day of our arrival came. The PR team was also in attendance to cover her return. I guess the proposal would have to wait, I thought. When I spotted her coming out of the arrival gate, I waved slightly, and she ran towards me. She had just left her luggage right there. With such momentum, she threw herself onto me, and I was knocked to the floor. I'm back. Now, propose. Hold on, right here, really. The exchange between us was all heard by the PR team, and the pictures graced the cover of the company newsletter the following month. Let me propose in a more relaxed setting. It's been 5 years since we got married, but I think I'll never forget the words I shouted that day. It still gets a lot of laughs at parties, and she's still laughing about it today. I hope you enjoyed that. Subscribing to our channel gives us motivation to create more content. We'll see you again in the next video. My name is Ethan. I'm 27 years old. I'm just a typical office worker. I use a computer all day at work, but right now, I can't see the screen clearly. Phew, I try to take a deep breath with my eyes closed, but they just won't open. I'm feeling dizzy. I've been struggling to get through my work, relying on caffeine from coffee to push through the day. Finally, it's the end of the workday. As everyone else is calling it a day, I lean both elbows on my desk, rest my forehead on them and close my eyes, thinking, finally, time to go home. Hey, are you okay? You've been looking a bit off lately, like you're not feeling well. My boss, Robert, talks to me with a concerned voice from behind. No, I'm just sleep deprived. Sorry, I'll be more careful. Seeing Robert look worried, I decide to tell him the truth. I thought he would scold me for staying up late, but instead, he seemed worried about my lack of sleep. Is something going on? Insomnia is pretty serious, he says, expressing his concern. I really wanted to reassure him, but it's true that I'm struggling. While it's none of Robert's business, I decide to tell him about the cause of my insomnia. A month ago, a new neighbor moved into the room next to mine. My apartment is a rundown corner unit on the first floor, and the room next to mine had been vacant for a while. A student-looking guy moved in during the moving season, and he'd been making a noise every night, bringing friends over. He seems to be a night owl, making noise, shouting, and occasionally causing the wall to shake. Additionally, it seems someone new moved into the room above mine as well, who runs the washing machine at night and stomps around loudly. I used to hear the sounds of the neighbors' doors opening and closing, but I didn't realize how thin the walls were because the room next to mine had been vacant. Due to these disturbances, I've been waking up several times during the night and suffering from sleep deprivation. I don't want to have issues with my neighbors, but it's been unbearable, so I reported the situation to the landlord. Despite my report, the situation didn't improve. I talked to the landlord again, but he just said that he'd left a note for them and didn't seem like he could do anything more. I guess I have to put up with it as the rent is cheap, but it's really tough, I told Robert. After hearing all this, he said, I see, that's quite a predicament. Lack of sleep can ruin your health. I understand your situation now. but don't hesitate to take a day off if you're not feeling well, okay? I felt grateful for his kindness and hoped that things would be better. However, even after another 2 weeks, the noise problem continued. I used to live in a shared house near my university when I was a student. So, I thought I had a certain level of tolerance for noise. But this noise is too much for me. At the shared house, we had strict rules, and if someone broke them, they would be warned and eventually kicked out by the owner if they didn't change their behavior. As it's a convenient location for commuting and the low rent, I chose this rent-down apartment, but now I think the shared house was a much better choice. I don't want to underperform at work. So, another day passed with me fighting sleep deprivation with the help of caffeine. As Robert was passing by, he talked to me. "You still look pale. Don't push yourself too hard. I want to talk to you later, okay?" and patted my shoulder. At the end of the day, Robert came to me and asked, "Can we talk in the meeting room?" I thought I was going to be reprimanded for looking so run down, but the words that came out of Robert's mouth took me by surprise. "Ethan, you must be having a hard time. Why don't you come stay at my place?" From the look on his face, it seemed like he wasn't joking. Apparently, he had been worried about me and had discussed it with his wife. Turned out that his wife also concerned for my health, suggesting that I should stay at their place to prevent me from collapsing. "You're still living in that apartment you rented when you got your first paycheck, aren't you? You should be able to afford a better place by now. Have you considered moving? But you probably can't hold up until you find a new apartment, right? For the time being, you should rest up at our house, okay?" I didn't expect such concern and tried to politely decline, feeling a bit guilty, but Mr. Robert insisted, humorously promising delicious home-cooked meals if I decided to stay. I didn't give an answer at that time, deciding to think about it more when I got home. My run-down apartment was not too bad, as long as there was no noise. However, the incessant noisy disturbances made me decide to move out. I felt the urgent need for a peaceful place to rest. I was on the brink of collapsing. But my family lives out of the state, and I had no friends in the vicinity to rely on. Although I felt guilty for inconveniencing Mr. and Mrs. Robert, I decided to accept their generous offer and stay with them until I found a new place. I had a moment of hesitation about living in the same house as my boss, but then again, it was not that much different from living in a shared house. I felt like I was imposing, but I decided to take them up on their offer. The next day, I gave Mr. Robert my answer and immediately started looking for a new place. It was decided that I would start staying at the Roberts' house from the following Sunday. And then the day has come. When I arrived at Mr. Roberts' house, Mrs. Robert welcomed me with a warm smile. I expressed my gratitude for their hospitality, to which she responded, "Don't be so nervous," as they helped me with my luggage and showed me to the room. "There's some time before dinner. Why not relax a little?" she suggested, and the three of us had a light conversation. "It's been a while since we saw you, John. You've really matured," Mrs. Robert commented. Actually, it was not my first time visiting their home. Back then, you used to bring your young colleagues over to our house for drinks. We don't see much of that these days, do we? I remembered the times when I was a new recruit and Mr. Robert used to invite me over. He was always considerate of his subordinates and communicated with them a lot at his home. When drinking with boss, there is often the exhaustion of having to listen to their heroic stories or their preaching about work, but Mr. Robert was different. Even when he talked about work, he was never imposing. He always listened carefully, which made him well loved by the younger staff. As we reminisced, Mr. Robert suddenly turned serious, saying, "Oh, I almost forgot. I have to tell you something important." He turned to me, a serious expression on his face. "We have a daughter living with us, John. I'm sure you understand, but don't try anything, all right?" His tone changed drastically as he stared intently at me. Mrs. Robert couldn't help but laugh at his stern demeanor. "I don't think John would do such a thing, but our daughter is quite pretty, you know," Mr. Robert said, his stern face softening slightly into a smirk. His wife chuckled. "You're still overly protective as always." I remembered their daughter from her student days, and indeed, she was a beautiful girl even then. Their daughter, Amy, had just graduated from college this spring, and she started working as a hotel staff at the front desk. I met Amy at dinner time. We were having dinner without her as she was coming home late, when we heard her voice from the entrance. "I'm home." I greeted her at the dining table, apologizing for starting dinner without her. But when I looked up and got a proper look at her, I was momentarily stunned. Amy had grown up into a striking beauty. "No problem at all, take your time," she said. Amy smiled and said something that had everyone at the table nodding in agreement. "She's so beautiful. It's no wonder the boss is so protective of her," we all thought. Amy then went to her room to drop off her bags, then took the seat next to me. At that point, the boss paused. Hang on a sec," he said, appearing flustered. The boss turned to Amy, who was about to start eating, and said, "You can't sit next to him, Amy. Come sit over here." He wanted her to switch seats with him. "She's a girl who's not yet married, after all. We can't let her sit next to a guy so casually," he joked. Yet, there was a serious look in his eyes. We all ended up laughing at our overly protective boss. Before going to bed, I took a bath. "Ethan, can you drink herbal tea?" When I got out of the bath, the boss's wife asked me so. When I replied that I was able to, she said, "That's great. Herbal tea helps you sleep," and made some for me. We were all sitting comfortably in the living room drinking herbal tea, when suddenly the boss said, as if he had remembered something, "Ethan, you're good at English, right?" When I nodded, he turned to Amy and said, "Amy, we've got a teacher right here." I saw Amy's eyes light up. When I asked why, she explained that she uses English a lot in her work at the hotel's front desk. The hotel is a Japanese-oriented, so a lot of foreign tourists visit there, so she had to pass an English test to get hired. But, apparently, actual practice is quite difficult, and she's a bit insecure about phrasing and such. I actually spent 3 years abroad in high school. I followed my father on his overseas assignment and lived there. Even now, I can still speak English because I occasionally have to deal with people from English-speaking countries at work. Today, I just want you to rest. I don't want to push you, but if you're feeling better, could you take a look at my daughter's English? The boss asked me this, and Amy also requested it. Of course, I agreed. Thanks to the boss and his family's kindness, I was able to sleep well that night, and I recovered a few days later. Going to work with the boss every morning was a strange feeling, but I got to hear all sorts of work stories from him, and it made me feel like a new employee again. I also felt happy that we could now talk as equals. His wife, who is a housewife, was really good to me. The food was delicious, and she even did my laundry. I was so grateful I didn't know what to say. The boss and I, who both have the weekends off, started having a drink together on Saturday nights. He used to drink every night, but now he's being health conscious and only allows himself to drink on Saturday nights. We enjoyed the evening with food prepared by the boss. I was surprised that he could cook, and we had a great time talking over drinks. As I listened to the boss talk and nodded, I suddenly became emotional. He talks the stories about his daughter with kind tone, his wish for happiness for his family, and his advice to me to walk a similar path in life. Watching him, I couldn't help but think of my own father. My father passed away before I became an adult. Just after we returned from the 3-year overseas assignment, my father passed away. I remembered the time shortly before he died when he told me, "Ethan, when you become an adult, I want to share a drink with you." Maybe it was also because the boss's gentle way of speaking was so much like my father's. If my father were alive now, would he be like this? Thinking that, tears streamed down on my face. "Hey, what's wrong?" Turning to my side, I found myself crying, no doubt surprising my boss. "No, I'm good. Just drunk a little too much." I shrugged it off with a sheepish response, but couldn't help the tears from spilling out, even as I tried to hold them back. "No, I apologize. I was just thinking of my dad," I admitted candidly. Then, I talked about the promise I couldn't keep with my father. "Is that so?" There were tears in my boss's eyes as he said that. "Your father would be proud if he saw you now, Ethan. You've grown into a hard-working, good guy." He said that, patting my shoulder reassuringly. The words just made me cry even more. His tone was just like my father's. It felt like my dad was talking to me. That night became a special one for me. As we promised, I used the spare time in the evening to tutor Amy. Her days off changed due to her shift schedule and her being a new employee, but she comes home early. We are able to find common time. She asks me about the conversations she struggles with, what she couldn't understand on that day. I answer her questions, and she actively asks me for more. I advise her on how native speakers would say it, the polite way of phrasing things. Amy diligently takes notes, practices pronunciation with me. To respond to her enthusiasm, I do role-playing exercises with her repeatedly to make her more practical in conversation and actions. Initially, I was nervous around Amy, but recently, we've been able to chat casually. We've started trying to make these small talks in English, making it a bit of a game, and we've become somewhat friendly. Before I know it, it's almost a month since I moved into my boss's place. Although I've been constantly looking for a new place, the good ones seem to fill up before I can even go see them. Maybe it's the season. I've been looking around without sticking to a single real estate agency, but whether it's bad luck or poor timing or just my searching method, I start to feel anxious. I can't keep relying on my boss indefinitely, I thought at that time. Speaking of which, Ethan, no, it's okay, yeah. My boss nervously started to speak. "Ethan, you haven't moved out of your old apartment yet, have you?" I was surprised, feeling as if he'd read my mind. I uttered, "No, it's fine. You can stay as long as you like. But Ethan, you've gotten comfortable here, haven't you?" he said, grinning knowingly, but it was true, even though it was at odds with my anxious feelings. I'm sorry, honestly, I'm very comfortable here," I said, and my boss laughed heartily. Although I had a lot of trouble finding a place, I ended up finding a place that was far better than what I originally aimed for. Thankfully, it was okay to move in as soon as possible. Once I secured my new place, I notified the landlord of my current apartment about my departure. Because the move was so sudden, I ended up having to pay for 2 places for a month, but I couldn't continue to rely on my boss for another month. Accepting it as it's unavoidable, I quickly started to prepare for the move. Moreover, my boss said he would help move things if I didn't have too much luggage. I ended up relying on him until the day of the move. On the day I left my boss's house, I made sure to thank his wife sincerely. I had stayed at their place for about a month, being cared for in every way. In gratitude, I prepared something to serve as a sort of rent payment, but both the boss and his wife refused, saying it wasn't necessary. "You tutored our daughter, so we're even," they said. After some time passed living in my new apartment, while I enjoyed the comfortable life, I also felt nostalgic for the time spent at my boss's place. I had been thinking to visit them again. "Excuse me, boss. I'd really like to express my gratitude properly. May I come over next Saturday?" I asked nervously. He replied, "No need for thanks, but we can drink together again. My daughter is off next Saturday, so it's perfect timing." Although he seemed happy, I was a bit nervous. On Saturday evening, as I rang the doorbell at the boss's house, he greeted me cheerfully. "Tonight, my wife and Amy prepared a feast because they knew you were coming. Come on in." Both his wife and Amy greeted me with smiles. "First things first, Ethan, let's have a beer and toast." As my boss went to pour the beer, I stopped him. "Wait, boss. I have something to say before that." At my words, his wife and Amy moved closer. Seeing this, the boss looked surprised, but his wife calmed him down, saying, "Just let him speak." Then, I stepped back and spoke out. "Boss, I have been dating your daughter, and I wanted to formally let you know." With that, I bowed deeply. When I lifted my face, the boss seemed frozen, deep in thought. After a while, he finally asked, "What do you mean by that?" Then Amy came next to me and said to her father, "I fell in love with him." His wife added, "Ethan is a wonderful person, isn't he?" And she and Amy giggled. Seeing this, the boss was flustered. "You knew about this?" His wife and Amy exchanged glances and started laughing. "I didn't know anything about this, Ethan. What is this all about?" The boss tried to regain some fatherly dignity, but his wife chuckled. "Aren't you actually pleased?" Exposed by his wife, the boss was flustered and said, "Don't say things like that." She continued, "You said it would be nice to have a son like Ethan drinking alone after he left." That was when my wife blurted it out, and I was taken aback, saying, "Don't mention that. Can't help it if it's Ethan." "No, seriously you guys," grumbled our team lead with a mix of joy and disbelief. I handed him the gift I'd brought. There is his favorite brand of liquor inside. Seeing this, he chuckled, "Nice choice. All right, you're forgiven. Let's have a celebratory drink to your relationship with my daughter, Amy." He had given us his blessing. We shared drinks and stories. "Oh, I might be a bit tipsy," he admitted, a perpetual smile on his face. From the way he was talking, it seemed he was quite drunk. "Listen, Ethan, if you don't make my daughter happy, you won't get off easily. But I'm glad the first guy she brought home is you, Ethan. I'm glad it wasn't some weirdo. Please take good care of my daughter." It felt as if I was announcing our marriage, even though I had only intended to announce our relationship. But it did become reality. 3 years since then, the team lead is now my father-in-law. Rather, he has become more of a father to me. I used to say I wish I had a son like Ethan, and now it's really happened. "Ethan, let's keep this going." It's our usual Saturday. Now, we enjoy drinks together with Amy and my mother-in-law. How was that? Subscribing the channel gives us encouragement to produce more. See you in the next video. My name is John Williams, a 30-year-old businessman. There's nothing special to note about me. I'm just working as an office clerk at a large wholesaler for alcohol. We don't have a store, but we do deliver beer and wine on credit to a wide variety of eateries, such as bars and izakayas. Each delivery person is in charge of a truck, and when morning comes, they load up barrels of beer and deliver to the stores they're in charge of. As for me, I'm working in an office with only women, handling things like processing credit slips and various chores. I think I've been placed here because they need at least one male hand in the office. Still, it's true that I often have bad experiences because I'm looked down on by people like the driver, the procurement personnel, and the warehouse manager. On top of that, the general affairs department is a women's garden. I feel uncomfortable. I often feel stressed because it feels like I'm caught on the horns of a dilemma. But the reason I'm still at this company is because not everything is bad. I have many colleagues I get along with, and I often get treated well by our regular customers. There are times for ups and downs. It would be the same no matter where I work. The change in my life happened this spring. The cause was a new department manager who joined the company in the middle of the term. He was a tough guy with a background in finance, having served as a branch manager of a regional bank. He had a tendency to try to settle everything with numbers. The department manager was rough from the start. Perhaps he felt pressured to produce results because he was hired in the middle of the term. His demands on us were too high. Suddenly, the previously laid-back atmosphere in the office started to get tense. According to the section chief secretly told me, it seems that the director is suggesting personnel cuts to the president. Indeed, there have been fewer drinking parties recently, and opportunities for outside drinking have been lost. It's a big blow to our company, which delivers alcohol to restaurants. I knew that sales were sluggish. When I heard about this from the team leader, I had a bad feeling. This was because, as far as the director was concerned, my performance seemed to be at rock bottom, and I was well aware that he had me in his sights. Perhaps being the only man among the clerks might give the impression of being incompetent. I had the impression that I was doing a decent job, but the director didn't seem to recognize my efforts at all. And a month after the director took office, the discussions about reduction began. It started with soliciting voluntary retirees. Apparently, no one expressed a desire to leave. The director then prepared a list for the reduction. My name was at the top. He subtly applied pressure, saying, "It's not mandatory, but if you care about the company." Besides me, several delivery personnel and assistants were chosen. It seemed like an arbitrary selection on the director's part. The warehouse keeper's name was on the list, and he was outraged. And rightly so. If the warehouse keeper quit, the company would be thrown into chaos. Because no one else can find a single bottle of wine in the huge warehouse. The president didn't seem to like the list either, but he had difficulty expressing his opinion to the director, who was an elite from the banking world. Even those whose names were on the downsizing list didn't willingly apply to resign just because their names were there. The company atmosphere was like, let's ignore the list, but the director didn't like that. Salespeople aren't in the company during the day. During the day, the director's target was me, the only one left in the office. Even when he didn't have anything to do, he kept loitering around my desk and nitpicking. I sincerely wished he would just stay cooped up in his office. Are you doing only that job every day? You have a tons of work because you're slow. The director would lean over my work and scold me in an unnecessarily loud voice. I guess he wanted everyone in the office to hear. Every day, the office atmosphere got worse because of his yelling. And the director blamed it on me. He said that the reason the employees' motivation isn't increasing is because I'm in the company. I was stunned to be told that being called incompetent and a burden to the company every day was really wearing me down. My stress was reaching its limit. I'm convinced that the reason I blacked out and collapsed while trying to get up from my chair at the office was due to the director. I don't remember anything after falling, but apparently I was quickly rushed to the hospital by an ambulance. I heard from my colleagues that I had been unconscious and appeared to be suffering since I collapsed. It turns out, stress was indeed the direct cause of my collapse. It was a result of a dreadful pattern of stress leading to insomnia and overwork. When they performed the tests upon my emergency arrival at the hospital, the attending physician told me that there seemed to be other worrisome symptoms, which surprised me a bit. It turned out I would have to continue with further diagnostic tests. The results of these thorough tests revealed early-stage colon cancer. Receiving a cancer diagnosis was quite a shock, but I was a little reassured when the doctor told me that since it was in the early stages, there was a high likelihood of complete recovery with surgery. A hospital stay for tests turned out to be a much longer hospitalization than I anticipated, which was bothering me. Just as I thought my hospital stay might drag on a bit longer and contacted my office, the document that the secretary, now named as Nancy, brought me was early retirement papers. She looked very apologetic as she handed them to me, saying she was told by the director to deliver them. "Thank you, who've asked the nasty task." When I spoke to Nancy, who had brought the documents, she told me, "You should just ignore such papers. Of course, I don't want to take early retirement." I shoved the envelope into the drawer of the bedside table in my hospital room. "John, we'll take your temperature and blood pressure now." The nurse came named Kathy, replacing Nancy in the room. The first time I saw her, I was so struck by her beauty that I didn't even realize when the injection was over. Yes, please go ahead." I get overly nervous when Kathy comes in. Her being extremely beautiful is one reason why I get so nervous. On top of that, she never smiles. She's called Iron Mask by the inpatients. It seems her fellow nurses also call her that. Kathy's expressionlessness and her good looks make her appear doubly intimidating. It's not that she's cold or anything like that to the patients. She's a strict yet kind nurse. The young attending physician told me that he's most afraid of being scolded by her. She doesn't raise her voice but seems to be able to express her anger in a quiet, matter-of-fact way. I thought I would be terrified if it were me. "Your pulse is a bit fast. Are you not feeling well?" Kathy, who was taking my pulse, quietly said so. It seems my pulse quickens just by having her near me. I was a little amazed at how nervous I was. "I'm okay. There's nothing wrong with me." As I hastily said that, Katie stared at me fixedly. And then, she let out a small sigh. I started to panic, wondering if I had disappointed her. But her sigh was not one of disappointment. "Don't just dismiss things lightly as okay. You're here to fight a disease, remember. If you're feeling bad or if there's even a slight difference from your norm, make sure to tell us," Kathy said with a serious expression. Then, she deeply bows in my direction, apologizing for her inadequacy. "Wait, why? You don't need to apologize for anything, Kathy. I understand there's a certain atmosphere around me that makes it hard for you to open up. I'm really sorry about that." I wonder if Kathy knows what people call her behind her back. I gently look at her face, wondering if she's hurt. Her usual expressionless face is there. I'll be a good patient." My words slip out awkwardly, as I don't know what to say. Iron-faced Kathy's eyes widen in surprise. Then she quickly returns to her usual expression and simply responds, "I appreciate that." I suddenly feel embarrassed and couldn't say a single word until Kathy left the room. Hospital life is surprisingly busy with continuous tests before surgery. Today, I didn't return to my room until past 3 p.m. after the tests. Dragging my test-weary body into my room, I find that there's already someone there. It's my boss. Just seeing him doubles my exhaustion from the tests. He notices me return to the room and, without any words of consolation, just says, "Hey." I don't feel like responding, but he's still my boss, even if he's not the most pleasant. As an employee, I don't have much room to argue. Quietly, I just sat down on the edge of the bed. "I'm sorry for the inconvenience, Director." That's the unwritten rule for employees, I suppose. My apology was met with a condescending nod from the director. "I've heard you're in for a long stay. Have you received the early retirement forms? Why haven't you submitted them yet? The company would be better off without deadweight like you." He spoke to me as though I were a child, which got under my skin. I must have let my irritation show. The director gave a nasty grin. He was trying to rile me up, I knew that, but his attitude was hard to stomach. "You came all this way to tell me that. I'm sorry for the trouble, but I have no intention of retiring early." I tried to choose my words carefully, trying to stay as calm as possible. Really, I wanted to shout him down and send him packing. The director smirked as if he could read my thoughts, and he didn't stop. If I caused a scene here, he might use that as an excuse to fire me. The tension hung in the air between the director and me, like a standoff. The one who shattered that tension was Nurse Kathy. "Excuse me, I believe I asked you to call me with the nurse call button once you return from your tests. Have you forgotten?" The hospital room door burst open, and in strode Nurse Kathy, glancing back and forth between the director and me. "I'm sorry, but could you please leave the room?" Her voice was soft, but there was an undeniable authority in it. She shot the director a frosty stare, explaining, "He's tired from his tests." What a rude nurse. I'm this man's superior, and the director rose from his chair, glaring at Nurse Kathy. But she simply pointed to the door and repeated, "Please leave." "Boss, that doesn't matter here. This is a place where you follow the doctor's and nurse's instructions. You think being a boss works everywhere." The director's face turned beech red at that. It was like she'd called him out for flaunting his petty power. "How dare you? I'll remember your name." With a parting shot, the director stormed out of the room like he was running away. I listened to the receding footsteps, letting out a sigh of relief. "Would you like to lie down?" Kathy, as if nothing had happened, helps me to comfortably lay down. After laying down, all the exhaustion came to me. "Why don't you take a nap until it's time for dinner?" As she suggests this, she pulls the blanket up to my shoulders. I can't help but feel a little shy. "Thank you. That man, he's a bit of a problematic boss. I appreciate you sending him away." As Kathy is about to leave the room, I call out to her, and she slowly turns around. In her flat tone, she says, "It's my job." Right, but still, I wanted to say thank you. Upon hearing this, her hand, which was on the doorknob, stops. And slowly, she turns back towards me. Kathy looks at me with a strange expression. The moment I thought her feelings briefly showed on her face returns to its usual expressionless, iron mask. Without saying anything more, she leaves the room. Fortunately, the surgery was successful, and I continued my treatment towards recovery. My body was at its limit due to stress. Even after the surgery, I was told to rest properly. During my lengthy hospital stay, I set a goal for myself. That was to see Kathy's smile by the time I was discharged. I really wanted to see her smile. I also had a feeling that I wanted to grab her attention. Apparently, the director had visited the hospital several times after my surgery. But he never made it to my room. I was surprised to hear from another nurse that Kathy had turned him away every time. I was nothing but grateful to Kathy. I was attracted to her. All the strategies I came up with to see her smile ended in failure. Whether I prepared a horse mask or practiced magic tricks, everything was a bust. When I shared my Make Kathy Laugh project with other nurses, the news spread throughout the hospital. Getting advice from other patients, brainstorming strategies together, my hospital life quickly became more fulfilling. Yesterday, finally, a seemingly exasperated Kathy told me to focus on my treatment since I'm the patient. From then on, every time I try to make her laugh, I get scolded with the same line. One day, as my discharge date was approaching, I got an urgent call on my cell phone from my colleague, Laura. There had been a customer who was a regular complainer, making numerous complaints every day, causing work to be disrupted. Normally, I would be the one dealing with this customer. The complaints were usually about simple things like wrong order or late delivery, nothing too serious. But this time, it seemed the customer was extremely angry because they received a different product than the one they ordered. I understand the situation, but I'm in the hospital. If you can't handle it, just escalate it to upper management. Let them deal with all of it, I advised. Normally, I could handle most complaints at my level. But this time, I'm afraid the bosses would have to step up. Laura said she would do that and hung up. The complainer was a guy named Mr. Ferguson, who ran a couple of bars and snack joints. He could be a bit tricky at times, but he wasn't unreasonable. As long as the first step in handling the complaint was correct, there shouldn't have been any problems. I've never experienced a complaint so severe that the phone didn't stop ringing for days. The day after Laura's call, my boss barged into my hospital room. He burst past the nurses who were trying to stop him, giving me quite a surprise. "Director, what's going on?" His forehead was covered in sweat, and his usually crisp suit looked somewhat worn out. "You've been handling that complainer and smoothing things over. It's your responsibility. Contact him and sort this out, now." He tossed the company cell phone at me, which made me feel exasperated. I did not pick up the company cell phone, so the director kept yelling at me, saying that I should be grateful that a useless person like me could be of use. I was starting to worry about causing a disturbance in the hospital. Reluctantly, I picked up the company cell phone. "Is it you again? This is a hospital. Please, keep it down." Just as I was about to make the call, Kathy entered the room. The nurse who had initially tried to stop the boss had apparently fetched Kathy from another ward. She was stone cold, glaring at the director without flinching. With her imposing demeanor, the director was taken aback. "I'm giving this good-for-nothing some work. Don't meddle with company affairs. You're just a nurse." Just as the boss's tirade was coming to an end, Kathy swiftly grabbed the company cell phone from my hand. Then she shoved it into the director's chest pocket, rather forcefully. "From this moment, this room is off-limits to visitors. Why don't you go back and do your own job?" Kathy said as she pushed the boss out of the room and closed the door behind him. I heard a click as a sign was hung on the doorknob. It must be a no-visitor sign. I could hear the director yelling outside the room. He made a ruckus for a while, but it seemed like he was escorted out by the security guards who came rushing. In the end, from what I heard from another nurse, he was even begging Nurse Kathy. I did feel a bit sorry for him, but I think it served as a good lesson for the director. Afterwards, it appears that the director got more complaints from a customer while handling a complaint. In the end, our regular client, Mr. Ferguson, said he would switch to another liquor store, effectively terminating his contract with us. It was a major blow to the company, and after a thorough investigation into the cause of the complaint, a revelation came to light. The director had rearranged the office on his own, and it seems a new and experienced worker had been put in charge of order reception. With no one to assist, the newbie was left to handle everything on their own. That's when the mistakes at the reception started piling up and caused the complaint. There are so many types of alcohol that you can't count them all. Without an experienced receptionist, it's difficult to understand specific wine brands. Normally, an experienced office worker would be assisting the newbie. But the director jumped the gun with the reorganization for cost-cutting, causing chaos throughout the office and the entire company. When the cause of the huge loss to the company was reported to the CEO, his reputation took a nosedive. Now he's been labeled as incompetent despite being an elite, and seems to be finding it hard to stay in the company. "What are you writing?" Kathy, who came to change my foredrip, peered at my computer screen. "I'm writing my own know-how on dealing with complaints. The method varies depending on the customer. Now, that director seems to have been assigned to handle complaints. The director, while retaining his title, has been told to take the lead in handling complaints. A colleague told me that he's been tormented every day by troublesome complainants. I think it would be a plus for both the customers and the company if I could contribute to handling complaints in any way." "Are you going to aid the enemy?" I get slightly embarrassed as she tells me this with a somewhat unresolved look. I'd rather see a smile on your face than that shocked look. In the end, I never got to see a smile on Kathy's face during my hospital stay. After a hospital life of over a month, I finally reached the day of my discharge. The attending physician and nurses who took care of me in the ward see me off at the hospital entrance. I'm about to get emotional as I even receive a bouquet of flowers as a discharge celebration. Kathy is also here among the people seeing me off. With her usual emotionless face, she stares at me. "I've been in your care a lot, Kathy." When I stand in front of Kathy to express my gratitude, I end up witnessing something unbelievable. "You did well, John. Congratulations on your discharge." With that, she softly flashes a smile, as beautiful as a blossoming flower. I'm about to drop the bouquet in my hands from the surprise. I thought to myself, what a terrible woman she was at the end. After all the effort, she wouldn't smile at me, but at the moment we'd never see each other again. She shows me a smile. Memories of my hospitalization with her cross my mind one after another. Once I start to recall the fun moments, I can't hold back anymore. I burst into tears in reaction to her smile. Seeing this, the people sending me off start to roar with laughter. I'm so embarrassed. Unable to hold myself back, I crouch down on the spot. Well, do not cry like that. People who work hard deserve a little reward. This is just a bonus. Kathy whispers this while gently patting my crouched back. A piece of notepaper, roughly inscribed with her familiar handwriting, has her cell phone number on it, and she gently places it in my hand. Below it are the words, "Contact me if you feel like it. I'll be waiting." By the time I stop crying in surprise and look up, she's already returned to the send-off line, waving with her usual emotionless face. I wave back at everyone while expressing my thanks, then get into a taxi. In the moment I get in, I call Kathy's cell phone. "You're impatient, aren't you?" After 5 rings, she answers the phone with a soft chuckle. I hadn't thought about how to ask her out and can't find the words in my sudden panic. Will you date me with the intention of marriage?" This was the first thing that came out. Even the taxi driver turns around in surprise. I'm so embarrassed I wish I could disappear into a hole. Isn't that a bit too hasty, but okay. Perhaps I found the treasure of my life in a hospital and I was too lucky. A few years later, I can't help but grin imagining her standing next to me in a white bridal dress. How did you enjoy today's story? Subscribe the channel and give us likes. It gives us motivation for our production activities. We're also looking forward to hearing your comments. See you again in the next video.